welcome to this Michigan Progressive Conversation with Lavora Barnes, campaigning to serve as Michigan Democratic Party Chair. Lavora, thanks for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion with you and get into some of the depth and detail that sometimes you can't do in a forum when there's, everybody has to have their 60 seconds kind of a thing.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Awesome. So, we do have a little bit of a time constraint, so I'm going to sort of move things along a little bit. I would like to give you a minute or two to talk about your background a little bit, how you came to be in the position that you're in, and what your background is for that,
Sure.
for what you're running for.
So I got my start in politics in Virginia, which is where I grew up. I had a professor who ran for office, and I volunteered to help him out and sort of got the bug and started working on campaigns from there. I've managed campaigns from city council, mayor, state rep, state house, all the way up to helping elect Virginia's first African-American governor.
Very cool.
And then spent some time on the Clinton-Gore campaign and then in the Clinton White House. I came to Michigan in the early 2000s, 2002. My husband took a job here, and I decided to come along. And then in 2004, I was hired by the State House, first as an organizer, working in Monroe County, and then moved up to political communications caucus director, where I helped manage that operation. In 2012, I was the state director for the Obama campaign. In 2013, I went with my friend Lisa Brown to the Oakland County Clerk's office, where I helped her manage and run that office. And then in 2015, I came with Brandon as his partner to the Democratic Party.
So let me ask you about that. There's been some rumors that there was sort of a deal worked out about that. Can you tell me how that happened?
So when Lon Johnson decided he was going to step aside and run for Congress, I thought it would be a good time for me to leave Lisa and come to the party, and I decided to run for chair of the party. Some very smart folks sat Brandon and I down together and said, we want both of you, figure it out. And Brandon and I had a very deep and hard conversation about which of us should be chair and whether we should do a vice chair or some other arrangement. And we decided on this sort of chair, chief operating officer arrangement together.
And what does that mean, and what has that meant so far in terms of the division of responsibilities, so that we have an idea where your experience has been in the party?
Yes. I'm going to say, honestly, it means I do the work. So I run the day-to-day operations of the party. I manage the money. I manage the operations. I manage the staff. And then Brandon takes the lead on the media, sort of front-facing work and the fundraising. But that doesn't mean that we don't do some of all of that, but those are the way we have decided to describe those responsibilities.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a progressive?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
What does that mean to you?
It's hard to grow up in a family like mine, where mother, father, grandmother, grandfather were marchers, protesters, had to fight for everything along the way in the South, and not be a progressive.
Right.
For me, that means that I believe wholeheartedly that our systems need to work for all of us, not just some of us, not just the top of us. And I sit where I sit, and I get involved to make sure that those voices can be heard.
Okay. So, for example, healthcare and education, human rights?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
How about should society prioritize human rights over individual or corporate wealth?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yes.
Should we have a plan for dealing with climate change?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what's gone on in the House just recently is largely that a lot of progressives pushed for having a committee to actually create a plan that could actually be implemented.
Absolutely.
And the Democratic leadership in the House said, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to. We're not going to give we're going to create a committee that that can talk about climate change, but they're not going to have the powers that were asked for. They're going to have to do everything in a very piecemeal way. In other words, putting up an awful lot of barriers between where we are right now and actually having a plan. And all that was asked for was a plan to make a plan, and the answer was no.
Yes.
So from my perspective, and I believe in general from the progressive perspective, though being a progressive, you can tell me if you think this makes sense, they work for us, and that means at every level from the bottom up. And so I think it's a reasonable question to ask, what can the state party do in order to put pressure on our elected officials to move in the direction of, hey, we need a plan.
Right.
Let's do this.
Right. So when you say state party, I hear all of us, not just one person.
Absolutely.
And I believe strongly that our state party's membership need to continue to make their voices heard even after folks are elected, and hold them accountable to the things that they promised us when they ran, and the things that we believe in as members of the party.
Right.
And I'm not sure we all do a good job of that. I think a lot of us sort of sit back and watch our elected officials, and sometimes are disappointed and don't speak up. Right. So I think it's very important that, and the state party can do that from our perspective at Hart Kennedy, but it's really much more important that our members are doing that and making their voices heard.
So what I'm asking is, as the party is supposed to be representing the membership, okay, and this is something that members need to do, and the party is there to help people organize.
Yes.
What I'm asking is, do you think that as chair, you would be looking to use resources of the party to help people organize to hold our elected officials accountable, including our Democratic elected officials, particularly since, actually not just including, but particularly since they're particularly, supposed to be representing us.
Right. So I think that the purpose of the party is to elect good Democrats to office, right?
Sure.
Not to then spend resources to publicly hold them accountable. I think we have to hold them accountable the way we know how, which is that we elected them, we can pick up the phone and call them. Okay. We don't have to get on Twitter. We don't have to get on Facebook. I can pick up the phone and have a conversation. And that's what I would do.
Okay. One of the reasons I bring this up is because there is often a lot of pushback against progressives in the party when they criticize Democratic elected officials. For example, our two state senators are behind a bill that curtail my free speech and the free speech of everybody else. In the same way, to prevent some people protesting Israel using some of the same tactics that we used to protest apartheid in South Africa. Are you familiar with the?
I'm not.
So there's a group called BDS that is advocating boycotting Israeli products, and there's a bill. I believe it's sponsored by Schumer, certainly championed by him. That would make it illegal and I believe for the government to do business with companies that boycott it. Or there's a couple of different versions of this that I've seen, but Peters and Stabenow have backed that initiative, and that concerns me because what they're saying is that people here in the U.S. Are not allowed to express themselves by saying, I'm not going to buy those products without getting some kind of punishment for it. And that to me seems entirely contrary to free speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression. And that's a problem for me with, our Democrats, our two Democratic senators. What do you think about that? I mean, how do you think that it's that we should be pushing back against that? Do you think that it's reasonable to criticize, or not to criticize, but reasonable to try to silence members of the party who may have problems with that, or problems with the position on the Green New Deal, or problems with other positions that our Democratic representatives take?
Right. The beauty of this party is it's big tent, right? We're not going to all agree. And we all do have our right to disagree with programs or policies within the party. What I don't agree with is attacking publicly. Like that's what the Republicans do, right?
Sure.
And because we have elected these two folks, we have access to them. We can have conversations with them, and we can disagree with them or agree with them because that's our right as members of the party. But what I don't want us to do is do the Republicans' job for them and tear down our democratically elected officials. You can't tell me that getting John James in there would somehow be better than having Deb Stabenow in there.
But I'm not arguing that, and I don't think that I don't know of any progressives that would argue that their goal is to make it harder to elect Democrats. But what has often happened is that any criticism or any public stand that says, I don't agree with this policy. Here are the reasons why I'm upset about it, or the reasons why I don't like it. That act is taken as an attack a lot of the time in the party. And I think I think there's a culture in the party that promotes the perception that kind of pushback from constituents is an attack. And I think that if we can't have an open and honest discussion about the problems that people have with the positions our elected officials are taking, and again, I say in public, I think that limits our ability to grow the party. Number one, because it seems like we're this unified bloc that if you disagree with people at the top, then you can't have, then you'll be attacked for it. Okay, and I think that shrinks our ability to draw more people into the party who aren't interested in tearing down Democrats, but who are interested in promoting a discussion.
Right. I think there's a difference between having a conversation with our Democrats and publicly, frankly, shaming them. And a lot of time what I see happening, and maybe the things that you're getting pushback on or seeing pushback on, are the attacks that come out of nowhere, that didn't start with a conversation, right? And if you haven't reached out and had that conversation, then it's not fair, frankly, to just go public with the attacks. The conversations need to actually happen. You can't just say we have to have a conversation and then start it. You have to actually converse.
Sure. So, for example, we had a big conversation in Michigan about healthcare between affordable access, which a lot of progressives, don't claim to speak for everybody, but a lot of progressives understand as a dog whistle for we're going to protect the insurance industry. Okay. And we had that conversation. And Whitmer won the governorship. I voted for her. She wasn't my first choice, but I voted for her. I know a lot of progressives did that, but a lot of progressives did that with the understanding that we're then going to keep pressure, saying, "Hey, we don't believe that it is the job of government to protect the profits of the insurance industry over and to make money that could go to actual health care." Because that's a diversion of money from healthcare services to, corporate executives and paper pushers. Is that that's a conversation we've started. That's a conversation we had in public during the primary. You think that that's a perfectly then legitimate thing to be, going out in public and saying, "Hey, Whitmer, we want universal single payer, and it's not enough to say affordable access."
Absolutely, but it's also important that you recognize that Governor Whitmer can't make universal single payer happen all by herself, and you've got to give her some space and time to get the systems in place. And she doesn't have a House or a Senate, right? No, so to rail against her because she hasn't done something that she frankly cannot do seems unfair to me.
On the other hand, Ocasio-Cortez has come out talking about 70% top marginal tax rate. Okay, and all of those words are important. Top marginal tax rate. Okay, and again, I know that the Republicans like to just talk about 70% tax as if everybody's going to pay that on every dollar that they make, as opposed to 70% is only on dollars above 10 million. As she's talked about it, which again is something that we had for decades in this country during the largest expansion of the middle class we've ever seen. And higher marginal tax rates than that, up to 94%. So part of the reason that I think progressives, and coming from the idea of a movement politics, are still want to, even though Whitmer doesn't have the legislature, still want to hold her accountable for that. To be full-throated in support of that is because of what's happening with Ocasio-Cortez right now. And it started with Bernie, when Bernie stood up and said, "I'm a democratic socialist, I believe in these kinds of things." And a whole bunch of people all over the country stood up and said, "Yeah, we like that," and looked around and said, "Hey, there's a whole bunch of us." Okay? And that's what we're having with Ocasio-Cortez, and that's what you get when you step out there and be full-throated about, here, these are the things these are the human rights that we need to be promoting and instituting, and creating, because human rights don't come out of nowhere. They come from all of us agreeing that we're going to give each other these rights.
Right.
So do you see that point, that it's not just that we understand she doesn't have the legislature. I should say progressives. I don't mean to speak for everybody.
I understand. Yeah.
We understand that there are challenges to that, but that doesn't change the fact that it is more effective when we have more people out in front making those arguments, right? Instead of the timid support. I mean, honestly, affordable access is what we've heard from Democrats for decades. So what do you think about that the full-throatedness and pushing her to take that farther?
I understand the desire for that, and I understand her desire to be careful and thoughtful before she jumps out on any issue, and that she's got an entire state to govern. Right. Sure. So I'd like to see us give her room and time to govern, and I expect that she will land the places we want her to do, because frankly she's also a progressive. Okay. I think there are also lots of folks in the legislature who could step up with some full-throated support. Sure. That would be very helpful, and we have to remember that we have to ask all of them.
Absolutely, and we have some that are. Yusuf Rabi, for example.
Yusuf is amazing.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to sort of move into questions more specifically about the party.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, let me ask you, what are the problems that you see in the party from your perspective on the inside?
Yeah. We have some technical issues with the way we manage the membership program that I would very much like to see us work on. We don't have nearly enough organizing capacity across the state. We need more people on the ground helping our local parties do the work of being state parties. And frankly, we have a divide that is long-standing in some places and new in other places. And we have to find ways to bridge that divide so that folks feel welcome in this party and join and come in and get to work right away and have things to do right away.
Right. So how do you what are some of your plans for solving those problems?
So the membership problem I am working on in the background. We've got a couple of new folks on staff with some technical expertise. I think we'll have this thing licked pretty quickly on the membership side. In terms of organizing, we have to we're going to ramp up One Campaign 2020 pretty quickly here in the first quarter of 2019. I've got to raise some money in order to make sure that we can pay those folks a fair wage, but we're going to get that done. And then in terms of bridging that divide, one of the things that I've said multiple times to people is that we need to have a party where when you show up at a county party or you show up somewhere, there's something for you to do. There's some place for you to go to feel like you're welcome. Our county parties open their arms to people rather than making folks feel unwelcome. One of the things I said, Chris Savage did this thing at his meeting in Washington where he said, raise your hand if you're new, and then all of you who are here, go meet the new person, welcome them in, and let's help them get involved, right? So I'd like our state party to have committees that meet. I would like our officers to actually work and show up and participate and travel the state along with me to visit the county parties. I think there are lots of places where we can make ourselves more accessible and therefore make the party more accessible.
So there's a lot of things to go into there. In terms, so just sort of broad picture in terms of recruitment, how big should the party be?
As big as it can get.
Big as it can get. 200,000 people?
Sure. I would love that. I would love it.
So you understand under our current system, that would bankrupt us.
Yes.
Okay, because it costs us $10 to onboard somebody just for the membership card, and there's probably more expenses in terms of labor typing in the information, because right now Excel sheets aren't, electronic communication aren't acceptable for that. Lots of other issues there. So do you think that's a good use of that money?
The first thing I would look at is, do we need to be mailing out that card, right? It's 2019, right? There are ways to get people their membership information on their phones in emails that do not involve us mailing them a $10 card. Right. I'd like to do away with the card. Okay. That's number one. Okay. Number two, I think that there are other processes that we can streamline in the way we bring people in and onboard them into the party that are electronic and are not paper-based and are not mail-based and don't have people sitting around a table stuffing envelopes. Right. And I'd love to build something where folks can actually look up their membership information online securely, know when they expire and renew right there.
Right. So you know that there's actually been progressive folks that have been building those systems.
I do.
And
I know because you told me.
Well, and we signed up. We signed up about 900 people with free memberships, and we made it clear how to do it for free. And I just want to point out we've heard sort of through back channels that about 30% of the people that we signed up also actually donated as well.
That's terrific.
So this is just to point out that we've gotten pushback. Like when we did over 3,300 people, new people, in the lead up to the April convention, we got pushback about it's costing us $33,000, and that was a choice that the party made. So I'm glad to hear that you're looking at that, I made exactly the argument that you did, by the way, in the Rules Committee about let's not have this card, let's have an electronic system.
Nothing in our rules that says we have to have a card. There are people who love the card. Hopefully they have one now and they can just hold on to it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the exact phrase that I was given. I was told that our older members expect to get a card.
Oh.
And, my suggestion, by the way, and I'd make the suggestion here is, if the card costs us $10, you don't have to have a card to be a member. You can get it electronically, and if you want a card, it's $15.
Oh, I like it.
Profit. Yeah. No, like you said, the party needs to be funded. I'm out totally for the party being funded. There are a number of other barriers to joining, and I think that from the progressive perspective, again, I don't mean to talk for everybody, but people that I've been having these discussions with say, we want to make the party as easy to join as possible, and as easy to donate to as possible. Mm-hmm. Right now it's very easy to donate to, but it's not as easy to join, which sends the message that we want you money, we don't necessarily want you. Mm. And when we're talking about being the party of inclusion, and especially the party that speaks for working people and poor people and people who have been pushed to the margins of society for various different reasons, that's, to me, seems entirely the wrong message if what we want is a big party.
I agree. And one of the things that we look, so membership has been a fundraising tool for the party for years, mm-hmm. right? Not every state party in the country does membership. Mm-hmm. But also in Michigan, membership is the way you stand up and say I'm a Democrat, because mm-hmm. we don't register by party here in Michigan.
Exactly.
So it is important that we have accessibility for folks who just want to say I'm a Democrat. Mm-hmm. So we're going to look at, when we're redesigning the mm-hmm. form and the program, ways to make it easier to mm-hmm. just click a button and say you're a member mm-hmm. and give us, an email address or whatever so that we can communicate with you. Mm-hmm. But we're going to continue to ask for money, because mm-hmm. I do believe that if you can, buy your Starbucks and your Monster drinks, you can mm-hmm. also give the party that you believe in $10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. No, and that is very true for some people.
Yes.
But it's also, let's acknowledge that there are some people
Absolutely.
For whom it is not true.
Absolutely. That is absolutely true.
And I think that there are a lot of people that have the capacity to give some amount of volunteer hours yes. Or other kinds of help that aren't monetary. And
those are important and in many ways more valuable than $10, right? Those hours are exact. So absolutely.
Right.
I agree.
So one of the things that also is a barrier to growing the party large is the situation with the rules. And I've certainly been that's been one of my big things for a long time. And the reason is, I just want to make clear, is that when you have a relatively small organization, it's possible to get things done based on interpersonal relationships. People know each other well enough that they have enough trust with each other that they can get things done in a relatively efficient way. Not necessarily the most efficient, but relatively efficient. When you start getting large, and actually the party's already larger than that system can handle, one of the key functions of the rules is to establish a basis of trust among people who don't know each other well or don't know each other at all. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about asking a bunch of people to come in and join a party called Democratic, and they walk into a situation that isn't democratic, that feels top-down and dictatorial in a lot of cases, that turns people off, and it turns people away, and it makes it harder to recruit people into the party. And so I think it's really important to have a good set of fair rules, and we've made some progress in that. We had a rules committee, we made a lot of changes, but there are still some issues, and I want to ask about some specific ones. So, for example, the former and now reappointed chair of the appeals committee said in one of our rules committee meetings, a subcommittee meeting, he said that he knows that there are caucuses in the party that use the unit rule, and he doesn't think it's the party's job to tell them how to run their caucuses. Mm. Now, The unit rule is something that was in the Democratic Party since Andrew Jackson in the 1830s and was abolished after the 1968 debacle of a convention in Chicago, in part because it was one of the things that caused an awful lot of divisiveness. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I assume you know what the unit rule is, yeah. And so when we went, so I'm wondering how we can build trust with new people when we have somebody who is not only was the chair, but has now been reappointed as the chair, who outright says that he doesn't believe in following the rules. Yeah.
I didn't hear him say that. I wasn't there for that, but if that's what he said, I will say this: as chair, it's going to be incumbent on me to put people in place who actually do understand the rules and believe in making the rules work, and also to hold people accountable. Okay. If your job is to make sure that these rules are followed, then please do that job, or we'll find someone who won't. I will also say I've not seen a caucus use the unit rule. Mm-hmm. But I don't get into every caucus room. Sure. So maybe another thing that we do is start thinking about whether staff needs to be attending and monitoring and helping to manage, so that we are making sure that we're doing things according to the rules as they are written.
Okay. And by the way, I've been told by the chair of the Labor Caucus that they use the unit rule. Ron Bieber said that.
Really?
Yeah. He described what they do. He said, we vote as a block. Mm-hmm. And I said, that's the unit rule. That's illegal. And he says, that's not the unit rule. Well, it is. That's what, you know what the unit rule is. Yes. When you insist that you vote as a block, that's the unit rule, as opposed to everybody voting the way that their conscience
That's how
is.
they blocked people like me from getting elected to things back in the,
That's exactly right. Yes. And so you understand why that's a big deal. Okay.
I do.
By the way, the other thing that the chair of the appeals committee says is that chairs of the unit running an election ought to be able to decide whether they use proportional voting or plurality winner first past the post voting. And we said that explicitly. We had a long conversation about it in that committee meeting. I have a transcript if you'd like to look at it. And he directly argues that you should be able to take a slate and split it into individual lines and run head to head, one by one like this, which is what happened in CD12 in 2017 and in CD5 in 2017. CD5 we have on tape. And again, this was the Rules Committee that rejected all of that. We don't have to follow proportional voting. And you understand why proportional voting is important.
Yes.
Why is proportional voting important?
It's all about fairness, right? Otherwise, we end up with a large block of people from one place who take control and manage and run.
Right.
So the appeals process, which I know you're very familiar with, is how we have handled those sorts of disputes before. Right. And I know that one of the things that you all talked about extensively in the Rules Committee was that sort of precedent-setting thing that we dealt with. And I'm hoping that having had all of those discussions during that period, we now have gotten to a place where we at least handle the appeals differently. And hopefully that begins to set a standard for how people behave in these caucuses.
I would hope so. I mean, we did the rules that we passed did eliminate prior rulings of the appeals committee as binding precedent. But Tim argued very forcefully to keep them as persuasive precedent. Okay, and insisted on a lot of other things that give the very, very firm impression that he doesn't believe in following the rules. And it's not, and the thing is, I understand. I have nothing against the man, and personally, I've had a good coffee conversation with him. He's a nice guy. I'm happy to go out to drinks with him, all of that kind of stuff. Yes. I just want the rules to be followed, and his arguments about that make it difficult to feel that that's going to happen. And I think I'm bringing this up to you here because when I've brought it up in other places, nobody thinks it's a problem. Do you think that that's a problem?
I think that Tim and I obviously need to have a conversation because I have not had these conversations with Tim. And I know him well, and I know him to be fair. So I think that whatever these issues are, we can get past them with some good conversations. And I'm not concerned that we're going to continue struggling with this. I think we're going to be all right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So I just want to check on our time because we're So another issue of fairness with the rules is currently under the rules, the State Central Committee is allowed to, for the chair to appoint and the State Central Committee to approve by a simple majority vote any number of at-large officers. Okay, which means that despite the fact that we have this rule that says State Central Committee must be elected by proportional voting, a simple majority can undo that proportionality by having whoever they want added to the State Central Committee, as if, for example, the Republicans in the Senate could decide, you know what, we're going to add 100 new senators, they're all going to be our folks. And I'm not saying that the chair necessarily always appoints just their folks, but I'm saying that to have proportional voting and then immediately turn around and have a simple majority be able to add whoever they want, that's not fair either. And so I would wonder, how would you handle that situation?
If I'm chair, I'm going to appoint an executive committee that's going to be members of the State Central Committee. It's what our rules allow. It's an important way to get more folks involved in the State Central Committee, folks who couldn't or didn't get elected at the local level, sort of spread out the number of folks who are there and increase representation. So I will have an executive committee that increases the size of State Central Committee. It's just
okay. Do you have any plan to do that in a way that preserves the proportionality that was established at the election?
I hadn't thought about that, but I'll look at it. So I haven't actually thought about what size the executive committee would be or who would be on it. I do think right now that executive committee is a bit large and unwieldy. Okay.
But what is it, like 100 and something?
I think that we're up close to 100 people.
Yeah.
So I do think that that's something I'm going to look at, but I honestly haven't really thought about who might be on it or what it might constitute.
Okay. So I would just say that there are, I think that you should have a good executive committee, but one of the other issues with the executive committee that we've had came about in discussions about financial disclosure. So, for example, the rules have said since 1974, at least. I haven't been able to find earlier versions yet, but I have copies from 74 and 91 and 2016 and our new ones that we just passed. And all of those say that the MDP can't even open a bank account without getting permission from the State Central Committee. The current rules at 7.3.5, you can read what the restrictions on the treasurer opening bank accounts. And in several different ways, the rules say that the SEC is the highest authority in the Democratic Party, short of a convened state convention, which only happens for a few hours every year. So one of the issues that's come about is that State Central is not given a full accounting of the budget. We've not been told even what accounts the MDP has. We learned from the situation with the FEC fine, the $500,000 FEC fine, that Chairman Dillon said would be taken care of without impact on our operations. And I don't know how much of an impact it has, but I know that if you have $500,000 over here and not over here, it's not helping out over here. So that just sounded ridiculous. But we heard when we asked about where that money was coming from, we found out, it seems by accident, something that was set up, from the podium, that there are soft money accounts that the MDP is in charge of or in control of in some way. Those aren't represented in anything that the State Central Committee has been shown on the 2 years that I've been on it, and despite the fact that we're required to approve the budget. And when we said, when there were a bunch of progressives on the State Central Committee this past time that said, look, we don't want to approve the budget until we see the finances, and not just like one sheet of very, very little information that's thrown up on the screen there, which is the traditional way that it's been done. And when we said, look, we're not going to vote to approve this until we see a finance report, we were told, well, if you don't approve it, then we'll just call an emergency meeting of the executive committee and they'll pass it. So this was used as a way to bypass the authority of the State Central Committee, which is actually established under Michigan law as the governing body of the party. So do you think that that's the way that ought to be done, and how would you do it differently?
So I'd like to say first that what you see at State Central now in terms of a treasurer's report is much more information than was happening when I first arrived at the party. Okay. They used to report only income, interestingly enough.
Okay.
Yes. And so we started reporting the expenditures because we thought it was important that State Central Committee meetings see the money that's going out the door. Okay. We report in the aggregate all of the accounts that are part of the operating expenses of the party. All of them. Okay. And there are 8 accounts. Okay. And they're all represented in there. Okay. So what we don't do is break them out account by account, right? Okay. So you don't see a federal line, a state line, and if that's something that would make folks feel like they knew more about the accounts, we could look at ways to do that. I will tell you, I have heartburn about handing over all of that information to folks who then snap a picture and throw it on Facebook or who walk it out the door and share it. And a lot of that is about Republicans, right? It's not that I don't trust our people. I don't trust the Republicans. Right. So I want to find ways to do it that still protects the party, make sure that we can continue to do the work we do. We always are in compliance with the once I came in the door and fixed some problems. It's a struggle. It's hard work to make sure that the party stays in compliance. The rules are complicated. The federal rules are very different from the state rules. And we spend a lot of time managing those accounts so that we're able to report properly from all areas. And we're going to continue to do that work. But what I'm not going to do is, hamstring us as a party whose sole job in my mind is to get Democrats elected by making a mistake when it comes to how we handle those finances and those reporting.
So, for example, one of the things that's been talked about in the progressive circles that I'm in is we understand that concern. We think that we think there's some things that are problematic about that, but we get that. And one of the things that we thought was that the finance committee would actually, be the place where that would happen. And when we got some people on the finance committee, it turns out that the finance committee is actually the fundraising committee.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And there's nothing in the rules that suggests that. And I wonder if that wasn't something that morphed over time, in past decades. I don't know that for sure.
As far as I know, the finance committee has always done fundraising, but.
Okay. Well, fundraising, sure. Yeah. But I mean, if it's the finance committee, of course, it's going to be involved in fundraising, but it should also be involved in finance and what are the finances of the party and understanding that. So what do you think about having a finance committee that actually was, people from the State Central, a smaller group of people that could, really look at that and do the due diligence that we're elected to do from our constituencies to oversee, what's going on in the party in a serious way, not in. I don't mean that to say that derogatorily. I'm just saying that. I've worked in a lot of different companies in a lot of different industries, and the idea that the governing body of a company would get this kind of financial information and be asked to approve a budget and have the authority to tell you whether or not you're going to have a bank account, but wouldn't actually have any way of seeing those finances. It's mind-boggling to me that any organization would operate that way.
I think that I'm comfortable looking at the idea of a committee that gets a more thorough accounting. I don't like the term oversee. We can't operate a party that has to decide how it spends its money by committee. Too slow and too hard to manage. But I do agree that there is a way we could structure a smaller committee of folks who get to see more of the information and can do some in-depth questioning and the kind of thing that we can't do at State Central, just given the size of the meeting and all of that sort of stuff.
Okay, I think that's really important for a lot of stuff. Is that and if you don't like the word oversight, I don't mean that in a I don't mean that in a mean way. I know it, in a certain sense that's gotten but what I mean is that the State Central Committee is the highest governing body, and we're elected to to make big decisions. And I don't think it's tenable to ask us to approve budgets that nobody outside of the very, very top leadership has real insight into. I just think that's asking us to take a vote on too little information.
I hear you.
So does that make sense anyway? I mean, just...
It does. I mean,
okay.
I understand where you're coming from. But again, my goal here is to get Democrats elected. And
sure.
I don't want this party to get in the weeds about like where we spent $100 on a Xerox machine, right?
Absolutely.
So I just want to make sure that we're all understanding that the goal here, get the Democrats elected,
sure.
and we should focus on that, and we should spend our time on that.
Right.
And the business of the party, I mean, you elect a chair.
Right. No, I agree. That we elect a chair and all of that. And I agree that we don't want to get bogged down in where we spend $100 on Xeroxing. But when we're talking about $500,000 and, and out of, when a cycle budget, is, what it is, that's a significant part of the cycle budget. So that's the thing that I'm talking about. And I'm not, and I have the impression, I've certainly had the same kind of feedback from other people that have said, well, you guys just want to like tear everything apart and all of that. And I'd like to point out that that's not what any of us have actually tried to do inside the party. I mean, I think that sometimes it's been perceived that way. Like when we talked about, free memberships and people gave us pushback because, well, how are we going to fund the party? Okay. And we had answers to that, but the pushback was always, well, you just want to tear it down. And one of the key things, I think, in building trust in a relationship is to have a generous interpretation of each other's positions up until the point that something really happens where we can't. And then we have to have a really different kind of discussion. But I would encourage you, to look at the kinds of things that progressives are talking about coming into the party, as not that we're trying to tear anything down, not that we want to argue with you about how you spent Xerox money, but that we want to understand what's going on and we want to help build the party to be grassroots up rather than top down. So that's sort of the place where I'd like to bring this around to, is the structure of the party. Right now, we have a very, very top-down structure. That starts, like you said, the chair at the top, and there are vice chairs, and there are congressional districts with their chairs, et cetera, and yet we hear complaints from, for example, precinct delegates that they can't get access to the van to go and knock doors in their precinct. So how do you propose that you would address that kind of structural issue? Right.
So we've got access to the van for county chairs and district chairs, and they have all been trained and asked to share lists with their precinct delegates. That's how precinct delegates get lists. There are thousands of precinct delegates, and that's a lot of van accounts and a lot of van training, and a precinct is a tiny amount of space to be giving someone access to the van, when a county could easily give someone the precinct list and should be doing that. And I think that's the way most people get their precinct lists in this. And so I don't understand where folks went and were told they couldn't have a list, because all of our county parties and district party folks have van access and can easily provide those lists.
Well, so for example, I know precinct delegates who have been talking about during the one campaign. What happened was, as they wanted to knock doors in their precinct, and there was somebody at a higher level who was supposed to be managing their access to the van, who said, "No, that's not a priority. We need you to knock doors over here, and we're not going to give you the stuff in your precinct because that's not that we don't want to spend resources over there."
So all of our organizers were instructed to give precinct delegates their precincts. So if that happened, it was against what our structure and our plan was. And I wish I'd known about it, because I would have fixed it, because we very much wanted our precinct delegates to come in, get those lists, and knock their precincts.
Okay. So it was not the policy in the one campaign to prioritize one area over another.
Oh, we absolutely had priorities, but for precinct delegates, we were very, very specific that for precinct delegates, give them their precinct.
Okay. What do you think? What happened there? Just miscommunication, or
perhaps, or overzealous organizer who wants to get their numbers inside their targets, right?
Okay.
It happens, right? People understand the importance of hitting those targets, and if somebody came in and wanted a precinct that was outside of those targets, I can see where an organizer want you to knock in the targets and not outside those targets.
So one of the points that a lot of progressives make about this is that what you're describing isn't really bottom up; it's more top down. And if we're going to have a big party, that puts a lot of strain on top down organizations. It means you have to have people that have a lot more time to devote to organizing because there's a lot more people that they need to organize. And it also means that the more people that come in from the grassroots have a harder time of getting of having good communication with the top-down organization because people don't have, the people at the nodes of control don't have the bandwidth to handle that many people. So that's a structural issue that any growing organization runs into. One of the solutions to that, not the solutions to that particular problem, but one way to ameliorate some of the other problems that come with that are having the rules consistently, fairly enforced, like we talked about before. But you actually have to look at structural solutions to that bandwidth problem from bottom up and communicating back from top down so that you don't get into a situation like, for example, a ton of our companies where, it's hard to get hold of that actual person. You have, you get voicemail and automated messages and all that kind of stuff. And politics is very retail today. And so people need to know their neighbors and go and talk to them directly and all of that. And to manage that on a large scale, how would you reorganize the party in a way that would allow that to happen?
So we have in place the structure to do all of that. That's what our local, county, and district clubs are for, right? And what we need to do is make sure that people know where to find those clubs, those club leaders, and get access to the lists that they want to knock the doors. They don't need to come to me. It seems actually backwards that they would be coming to the state party and asking for a precinct list rather than going to their neighbor, who happens to be the chair of the local club, and asking for their precinct list.
Right. No, I agree. And I actually, Brandon once told me that, gave me a long spiel about how everybody's calling him all the time and all of that. And I'm like, I have your number, but I think I've called you twice because I only do that when it's important. Why are all the, I agree. That to me is an indication that there's not a clear party structure that works for people to be able to get information in and out.
Right. But I don't get to hire them, right? I don't get to hire the county party.
Right.
I don't get to hire the local chairs. I don't get to. So the way we fix those local clubs is to get people elected at the local level who will do the work and open the doors for the folks. And that's what's important, is making sure we have people in position there who understand the importance of grassroots organizing and involving people locally.
So, like, for example, you mentioned Chris Savage before, who's my county chair. Okay, I'm on the executive board. Yeah, right. You live in the same county. He's all excited that we have 1,100 members in Washtenaw County. Washtenaw County is 467,000 people. Okay, the people that we have in place right now, they did a great job in a lot of ways in Washtenaw County, and Washtenaw is one of our bluest counties in the country, and it really should be one of the anchors for growing out what works. And there's a lot of stuff that they've done that has worked. But in terms of organizing large numbers of people, there's 14 congressional districts. There's about 15,000 people in the party right now. That's about 1,000 per congressional district. We're having these problems. And if we're talking about growing from 15,000 to 200,000 or 300,000, are we going to? Do you think that we need to have paid county chairs, for example, in order to handle that scale of organization, or paid organizers that maybe aren't the county chair because the county chair is elected, and that's an elected position. Maybe that doesn't get paid, but maybe we hire people that work for the county chair, not for the state party. What do you think about some of those?
Those are terrific ideas. I think that counties need to work on fundraising in order to be able to make that happen. But those are all terrific ideas. I think, too, though, we have to think about the success of the party in numbers beyond just numbers of members. Membership is important. Activism is absolutely important. There are plenty of people who are active and knock doors and make phone calls and talk to people who aren't members of the party. And please keep doing that, right? Like, you don't have to be a member of the party to be active and talk to people why it's important to vote. And so I don't want to measure success by members of the party. I want to measure success by elections.
Right. No, I absolutely agree. That makes perfect sense. But I think that there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg there. I mean, and I don't know if you agree or not that we would do a lot better electing candidates if we had more people in the party that were working to do that.
I think we would definitely elect more if we had more people working to do that. Mm-hmm. I don't know that they have to be members of the party to do that. I welcome them. I would love to have them. Okay. But I think that we need to be open to having folks doing this work alongside us who have decided that being a party member is not for them.
I absolutely agree with that. I think, like, for example, DSA does a lot of stuff like that. Indivisible. Yes. But I think that their membership is open to, all of the members of the party, right. And our membership is, according to the rules, open. But some of the culture can be a problem, and some of the rules, when they're not followed, that can be a problem. So we're on this time constraint and almost running out of time, but I promised you that I wasn't going to be the only one that would ask questions. So do you have some questions for me coming from a different perspective?
I would really love to hear you talk to me a little bit about, like, what's important about being a member of the party to the folks that you, and what it is that they would like to get from the party. Because that's a question that sort of looms in my mind, because there's a lot of talk about ways to open up the party to more members. What is it that folks are expecting and would like to see from the party?
So, for example, I was one of the primary authors of the platform that Michigan for Revolution ran on in 2017 for party offices. And the emphasis that we put there, you can go back and look at it, is that we want the party to be a service organization to help local folks do that kind of organizing. So, for example, when we talk about access to the van, you say that, there's thousands of precinct delegates. Well, yeah, so let's get more and more and more people trained on the van, would be our perspective, and have anybody who's trained on the van be able to access it, at least for their area, so that we can have people who are in their communities with access to the data and therefore the ability to use it most effectively because they know their local communities best. Okay? And then we would like to have support for them. So for example, we should do training videos on the van, and maybe there's a little test or something like that, and people that go through it do what they need to do, and then they can, go and do that. And better yet, we should have regular trainings that we get people to come in person and, work with it. And so that if we train these people now and we do that cycle after cycle, after a few cycles, we're going to have all of those thousands of people that you mentioned. There are going to be that many people trained on it and more. Because there are people that are interested and want that because they want to go and knock doors in their neighborhood. And that might not be a neighborhood that's targeted by the campaign specifically, for various reasons of their statistics. But if we stop targeting them at all, we end up with whole regions of the state that completely go to the other party because we're not even making the argument there in an effective way. So we're looking for the state party. We all agree needs to raise money because it needs resources. And what we're saying is that those resources ought to be spent on providing the infrastructure to support the activity at the local level rather than on things that direct from the top down. It should be things that support from the bottom up. Is that a clear answer to your question?
Are there examples of the things from the top down that you think we're spending resources on that perhaps we shouldn't?
Well, for example, like what I talked about before, you had organizers in the one campaign that were making these decisions based on so the top-down ideology is they have targets, okay, and that's a perfectly fine thing if they have targets because they need to try to organize people to hit those targets. But when we're spending a bunch of effort on that, and we're not spending a bunch of effort on getting people at the grassroots the capacity to just go and do that instead of having to go through some node that has all these other concerns that their paycheck depends on. That's when it's not that anybody at any particular level is trying to do something nefarious. It's a matter of the system being structured in a way that it incentivizes behavior that isn't bottom up; it's top down. Right. Did that answer the question?
So that structure, the campaign structure, is part of, but different from the party structure. And what I would argue is that local, county, district level is the place where those folks who want to work outside before even we have targets should be working. And the fact that folks show up in September and want to knock doors that are outside the target, if I'm that organizer, that concerns me as well. Like, but that's what the party's for, the local, county, and state party. And I think that we need to make sure that we're giving our campaigns room to make decisions about what they need to do to win. At the same time, we're doing our organizing work, and we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
And that the organizing work, I agree that there's a lot of organizing that is more at the local level. But the infrastructure to support that, like access to the van and training for that, and training on, for example, lake-off messaging or different things like that, that some county parties like Washtenaw has done, for example, and that can be done at the county party. But there's also there's some things that there's no reason that you need to reinvent the wheel 83 different times across all of our counties. Whereas if you had resources at the state party being spent on creating those resources and delivering them as easily as possible to local parties and just all the way down to precinct delegates and just regular Democratic voters. That's the kind of thing that that's one of the kinds of things that we're talking about. Is that a clear answer?
No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I think the other thing I'd be very interested in talking a little bit about, and I know we're short on time, is folks come in new to the party with ideas and suggestions. But one of the things I find is there's like a lack of patience, which feels to some of the folks who've been around for years like a lack of respect for the work that folks have done, the organizing work that folks have done, the protest work that folks have done, the suggestion that someone like me may not be progressive just because I have a job and have been part of the party for years is frustrating to us. And I'm just wondering if folks understand how that can be perceived as frustrating, that discounting the work that longtime organizers have done in the civil rights movement and the women's movement. It's hard to take when you've worked hard for years to get where you are.
Right. No, I get that. I do. I also, by the way, I also feel it the other way. I'm not trying to derail your question. I want to come back and address it, but I just want to point out we also feel it the other way because a lot of us have worked outside of the party for decades. I started going to protests before I could go to protests because my mom took me. Okay. The first protest I participated in myself of my own volition was against the incinerator that got built in Detroit eventually back in the 80s. That was when I was in middle school. There's a lot of us that have been doing this work a long time too. And just because we haven't necessarily supported Democratic candidates, Democratic Party candidates because of where we felt they were on the issues, we often feel that we're told that we're not real Democrats, or we're not really interested in building the party, or we're not really interested in electoral victories and all of that. But so I just want to say that goes both ways. But absolutely, I understand that, and I try to, and I try to make the point, which is why, for example, I asked you about your experience in the party right at the beginning. I wanted people to know that, because there are a lot of people in the party who have done a lot of really, really good work, and I think that the frustration on the part of new people coming in is that we haven't seen things like, for example, the full-throated support from the kinds of candidates that we're told we have to support. You have to vote blue no matter who, we're told a lot. And we want to move past the kind of thing where we're voting for somebody because of, the label that they have, as opposed to voting for somebody because they support the policies. And there are compromises, and we recognize that. But we need to be able to have that dialogue in an open place where we're not being attacked because we think that we should be having people that are making the argument, even if they can't push the policy yet.
Right.
Because the point of making the argument is to get to the public political space where we can make the argument. And so a lot of the frustration from the progressive side, from the new people coming in, is the unwillingness to make the full-throated argument so that we can create the space to actually get the policies passed. and so that feels to us like a strategy to protect the status quo. And the status quo is donors have an awful lot more power based on the amount of money that they have than individual voters have, or that even large groups of voters have who don't have a lot of money. And that's partly driven by forces beyond what you can control because of the system that we live in. But we don't feel a lot of the time that that's being addressed, and we feel that very often we're told, no, we can't do that now. We have to just do this here, and because if we try to do that, then it'll be a disaster. On the other hand, look at what we just had. I mean, Ocasio-Cortez is in a disaster. She's opening up the conversation. Bernie is in a disaster. He's opening up the conversation. Rashida Tlaib is opening up the conversation, and I would like to see people take that as evidence that, hey, maybe the argument that we're making about let's not be timid about these things, let's make the argument, and okay, we can't get the policy passed right now, we understand that. Republicans had that problem 40 years ago. Look where they got. They started making the argument. So does that answer your question?
Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I know that we have to wrap up now, but I would like to invite you back to have another conversation where we can be a little bit more less time sensitive, and we can talk about some of the more nuanced details of some of this and all of that. Would you be willing to come back and do that?
I would be. Yes.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a great conversation.
Yes. Thanks.
Thank you.